Hi, everybody. We're just checking to make sure everything is okay. I have a few questions this evening. I'm not sure I can get through them all, but definitely we'll be able to use them at another time. Very good. Um, this one is from Chris McLaughlin, and she has a few questions, actually. Some of the questions have a similar bent, uh, and we can cover some of them that way, but we'll just give it a try, see what happens. So while listening to the last webcast you made, mention of mirror neurons. What little reading I've done on this subject had me wondering about consciousness and transmission and the role it plays with intercellular communication. How meditation and an increase in empathy and compassion would have an effect on broadening the cell's communication process. It's really a kind of a very deep question. First of all, I have to admit there's not very much known about mirror neurons, except they're suspected to be highly influential in allowing others to engage with others and know what actually is occurring in another person. We're not at that stage yet, but we have a relationship with our emotional disposition that we are affected by others emotionally. And so therefore, we'll come up with some kind of repartee that relates to what we assume is meant by what the other person said or how the other person acted. It's an interesting dilemma because as you think about this, if you can just let your mind trail into an understanding of how we're made up literally by, and this goes into Carol Martin's question, how does one's relationship with other lives shift as one grows? Is there less characterization? Does it have to do with frequency? Really, when we're looking at these lives, many of us have found that we most often bridge the gap between us being a child and us being an adult with a partial recognition, at least, that we are partly acting like our parental background and partly acting as if we're independent from that. Most often that independence is seen as hope that we're not doing exactly the same as they are. That sounds a little bit negative. But also at the same time, our ability to be conscious is not very sophisticated. Our ability to assess, consider, relate to, and come up with an idea around what is valid or invalid in any kind of a relationship is usually considered highly sophisticated by us personally, of course. And it is normally not as sophisticated as what we believe because we are trying to engage and sense or perceive how the other is emotionally expressing or intellectually expressing, verbally expressing. And we can only do that based on how we believe that should be. And it's based on a kind of training and a kind of copying and a kind of made up our mind that suits. This is not a negative way of engaging with a personality um, of any individual, including your own, it's a way of attempting to understand as deep as you possibly can in an instant that it's probably someplace along the line of about 2 seconds. Because if you come up with a response faster, then in our world you're considered worth listening to because you're fast. Maybe fast, but you may not be seeing something very deeply. Certainly, with the idea that both Chris and Carol are talking about, it relates to compassion and empathy, and sometimes sympathy for the other person. You will not have time to be sympathetic, empathetic, or compassionate if you come up with a fast retort that makes you think that you're more superior because you're answering quicker. You don't allow the intellect or the mind to consider beyond the images that you have about being valued for your quick retort. It's often called intelligence. It's a real misnomer. However, if you get it out there first, it's considered more important than somebody taking a couple of minutes and thinking it through and coming up with an idea that is has more understanding in it because it was faster. That's a very important point, but there's a secondary point. We are trained to protect what we say and do. Actions are protected by us. Our first consideration could be devaluation, but only if the trainers devalued their stuff all the time. Yeah. Is it possible, Ron, to engage and not necessarily agree with our trainers? Absolutely. However, in doing that, you will be judgmental because it's 21st century. Part of the 20th century was being judgmental of those who brought you up without even realizing this one thing. They did in their life what they had to do based on how they were trained and brought up in a survival way. This is most fascinating if you can stop yourself from reacting. You can then allow yourself to consider, reconsider, become wistful even about things that you can perceive and wonder about whether every perception you have is exactly appropriate. It's certainly appropriate for you, but whether it might be truly appropriate if you had that period of time that had no anger, frustration in you for not getting your way. Every child is trained not to get their way all the time. Unless, and in the old days they called it spoiled, your parents allowed you to get your way all the time. Then you would be super sensitive about not getting your way. And that causes a major problem. You'll know definitely that whatever comes out of your mouth has to be true. And you have to be validated by being comforted by others about your great wondrousness of truth. This is not a negative thing. This is completely symbolic of a general relationship that we all have of creating images with the energy that lies within us. We're consistently, and that's another question by Chris, we're consistently involved with an understanding of a form we call personality, or not. If we're not interested in understanding ourselves or others, then we're interested in protecting ourselves or others. Why would you feel terrible inside? if you're not trying to protect, you're feeling terrible inside. Oh, what a terrible question to ask out loud.
I don't get that.
The feeling terrible inside allows you to know there's something to be terrible about. Feel terrible about. In fact, there may be nothing there. But your training has exclusively enabled you to consider there must be something. Matter of fact, if that's an image that you have inside of you, you have it there because it was shown to you most often. Now, that sounds rather simplistic if you're dealing with people who are terribly depressed. And I would agree. But I'm talking about a band of people who are really, in a kind of a way, nervous about the images that they have within themselves and how they are portrayed to others and how they are portrayed to themselves. That's called a normal person. Most of us are right there, connected on that line. If you believe you don't, pay attention to you. Try to be a little bit more conscious, which is part of the questions that they're asking. How can you engage with this consciously and not have a reaction that is seemingly not helpful to you in the protection of how you function normally? What the heck does that mean? It means if you're used to functioning in a particular way, doesn't matter what kind of way it is, you will tend to protect that way of functioning. You can begin to see this and slowly, and emphasis on the slowly, begin not necessarily to agree with it. You'll kind of absently and slowly also notice that you don't necessarily like the feeling it gives you because you're doing something different than how you believe things should be. This is the fault of no one. This is an engagement with a tremendous amount of images that you have, multiplicity of images, thousands of them. Underrated, of course, that thousand part, that you put together, and you do that on a daily basis to emphasize the bigger image that those smaller images come together as. Hope that English is all right. When those images come together, that's called a personality. And you're constantly emphasizing and reshaping those unconsciously. Negative and positive doesn't mean anything in the unconscious reflex. But similarity as a word means a lot. If it's similar to how you have been before, that makes sense, and there's justification involved, and it's within a nanosecond. It's greeted with a flare of okay. That is not negative. That's how we do it. Now, when you're engaging with mirror neurons, if you have this activity going on all the time, those mirror neurons tend to solicit a kind of place that relates to you, how you see you. They solicit it because also within your structure and capability lies the ability to notice that you are literally a very able being. So those mirror neurons show you aligned with how you normally act out They show you reflexively how you need to act to be the same. And automatically you do it. You don't even think about it. Now here's the other idea of the mirror neurons. You're engaging with another. If you can quiet down and pay attention to trying to be quiet inside, and I have to admit the Buddhists had a great idea and still do, sometimes even taught. That if you try to make yourself empty inside when you meditate, you're not focusing on organs, you're not focusing on anything. It will tease you into attempting to make your personality empty so you can watch it. Whoa, just a minute now. Okay, how do I get there? All right. You have organs in your body. You have reactions to almost anything and everything because those things are there for a purpose. They're there to help you to engage with life and protect yourself against anything that might supersede the way you think you need to engage. Absolutely okay. Now, here you go. You're trying to make inside of you quiet, which means also your emotional disposition, your tendency to be valued physically, emotionally, mentally, because of the need you have to be as able as others, legitimate, and independent, which you are not. You are dependent on the inner engagement you have with a relationship with others already organized. So that's kind of not independent in one way, it's independent in another way, you might say. Now, that's not negative. That's how we survive. Now we look at something that's really interesting. If you're quiet inside, what do you do with what you see? You learn how to soften down. That's called empathy. You learn how to even get softer. That's called compassion. When you notice others are acting similar to you. Wow. That's distressing. If your focal point is legitimately armored so that you can be validated by whatever you do and whatever you actually don't do. There are pieces and parts that lie within us all that help us to notice more, but also help us to hide more from ourselves. Those pieces and parts are reactive states. They're legitimate. There's nothing wrong with them. But what we do forget is that we are capable of reacting from one extreme all the way up to the other extreme. And if you consider that, there's a whole big area in the middle, but if you consider that you are able to engage in a kind of down way and a kind of really up way, and there's a whole bunch in the middle, then if you can watch that, then you can note that's where your intensity is. Carol used the word frequency. I'm using the word intensity. You can notice where the intensity is. You can calm the intensity down because surrounding it, if you can do it consciously, is less armor, less need to have it intense so you can feel better. And then you try to soften down. You're not feeling better because it's relating to you not being the way you were before. So you're learning. We all don't do well with this. It's a matter of understanding, learning, and recognizing that we're used to grading ourselves, grading others, and we give them like D, C, A, blah, blah, whatever. reflexively, because now we're an adult. We're a parent of all other people on the planet. It's this kind of thing that we've been aching to be since we were about 2 or 3, unknowingly. It's a real weird thing. No, it's not. It's, you ask this question, when am I going to grow up? We don't say, when am I going to grow down? When am I going to grow sideways? When am I going to broaden my engagement with life and learn more about living rather than reacting to life? I don't know. Don't have a question for that. I'm wondering, though, would it be helpful to be more conscious of that which allows us to live in any way that might consider options different than the ones we already use? This is a tough question. I believe that might be possible, but not all the time. Because we're human beings, I do not believe we have perfect people on this planet. I know it's a shock, but I don't believe we do. I believe we have very good judges. I believe we have very intelligent people. I believe we attempt the best to understand with great acuity what we have in front of us, and we find that we can't. We understand some things, we cannot understand everything. That means there's room for growth. Our relationship with, if you believe you can, or at least can handle the concept of you being an energy being, then your whole system is energetic, because all systems are energetic. Electrical, chemical, don't care. Energetic. In nature. Thank physics for that. However, when we're dealing with this engagement with the physical form, emotional disposition that is very physical, intellect that is very physical, we're dealing with often two-dimensional engagements with life. Yes, no, good, bad, right, wrong. It's a handicap. Too many options confuses matters. I think we're capable of having more options. I believe that that is true. And I believe that every individual on the planet has that capacity. Yet we restrain ourselves from going beyond where we believe we have to be considered considerable. It is not a devaluation, but it is a devaluation of our potential, I think. So, in relationship to these questions, wow, I think these questions are wonderful. I think one of the things that I said, if you try and see your inner sight as a field, then you can allow yourself to understand that there's depth of field, and there are things closer to us that we can see theoretically better, at least on the surface. And if you see life as a field, you can allow yourself to see the dimensionality of it, where you can say, well, what's closer to me today, I think today was good. But where did this come from, and where did that come from? It's just the field. So if you can see a field of force, of energy, But literally, we have encountered by our own projection. We were set it up for ourselves, unknowingly, unwittingly. Even if it is known, it seemed to be the right thing to do at the time. It may not be, but it seemed to be. So we have one option at our disposal based on how we see the field. We have other options that are available as soon as we can engage with the field differently than we can currently. But with that knowledge, it actually gives you an option, even if you don't know what the option is. I often talk about using a portable form that you can be engaged with because of my interest in the Eastern orientations and the Middle Eastern orientations related to chakras or Sephiroth. To me, these are portals through which energy comes, and these portals are always available to us, even if they're just open a smidgen. And for some, they're open a lot. That can be a difficulty because if they open a lot, then the energy coming through wants to help you to change, and you want to help you not to. But that's not always the case. And we learn as a little bit of time goes on. And the wonderful thing about that is those, I'll call them higher states of flow that can enter into these planes that gives us life. These higher states haven't got any interest in putting the individual down because they know, oh yeah, this person is in a high chair and this other person is in a normal chair meaning a kitchen chair. We've elevated. Another one's in a different kind of chair or active in some different kind of a way and learning. And each one of these has an individuality. Wow. But each and every individual or beingness in existence has a kind of individuality. The breadth of this consideration is huge. There's plants, there's dogs, there's cats, there are all kinds of animals that are like engaging, and they're human beings. There's all kinds of other beings, perhaps, that also has that we don't know very much about, maybe. But all existence acts like one life. Be enlightened with that. Be out there panhandling with it. Apparently, it's the same thing. Apparently, we can look at this and wonder about it without coming up with a perfect answer. I like that idea because that allows you the freedom to consider something through the individuality that is really a collection of images that you've put together for a purpose that would be very viable in your skin. And engage with life with that. Doing what you can. Sometimes you will not be able to do well. Sometimes you will do exceptionally well. Make friends with both. When you're doing something well, you might consider, is it possible to do even better? Or you might say, wow, I'm doing okay. When you're not doing well, you say, there's got to be other options here, but I can't see them. How can I find out? Blah, 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 blah. So you slowly engage slightly differently. That is allowed. You're allowed to change the images of your relationship with life because they're clusters of life. In this plane, multiplicity of images. Past lives are a multiplicity of images that enable an individual slowly, including this one, to engage with higher states from my perspective more ably, bit by bit, more consciously, knowing full well that it is real and true, that energy moving through us. Not diagnosing it with rules and regulations, but experience, understanding where you can have that experience and understanding, not competing with others, but just being okay with where it is and trying to broaden that engagement the best you can with tremendous respect for you, no matter what level you're on, and tremendous respect for others, no matter what level they're on. Wow, that's a little bit too much. Right in here, somewhere along the line, there was this idea about becoming actually empathic and compassionate. Our experience defines those terms as they define every other term that we ever run into. Nothing negative there. And we continue to grow as we can, not as someone else has expectations of our growth, and not how others define growth. This is a tough one to hear, tough one to understand. There's another question by Chris, and she says, the exercise we do at the beginning of meditation, opening the hands at the chest level, at the heart level, are the little fingers keeping the heart open off the body at the front of the body while the thumbs are opening the back at the neck? Very interesting, Chris. Yes, the little fingers help because I ask you to concentrate a little bit softly on the little fingers. I really emphasize softly because it helps the hands to remain open, helps the chest to open a little bit more. The thumbs are related to the root gonad centers. And often, not always, often, energy comes up the back related to the root gonad center, but not always. It can also come up the front. It can feel like about a foot wide straight up the front. It can feel like a foot wide up the back. It can feel like a little triggle, a little something that just happened. You can't put your finger on it. There's all different kinds of experiences that you can have with this. And they are there to help you to be okay, kind of, with growing. That's difficult for us because all the time we're deferring to our definitions that had been just prior to the experience. And there is a great nervousness about growing. And that energy does not go into you to give you trouble. That's a big piece of misinformation. It goes into you to be helpful to you. And every second you have a reaction that is more intense, it'll make it more intense. That's what you wanted to do. Yeah, but. No, 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 no. You don't understand. What you're doing is protecting that which was before the moment. If you soften that down, it would become softer. And that's wonderfully helpful. Even that last statement, if you soften you down, you're helping you. And the energy coming into you will go to where you want it to be helped. You see, you can't fake it. It's real. So one thing I always say, and you can try it, you don't have to believe it. Ask yourself in the energy, because that energy is you, ask it to be gentle, balanced, and appropriate. So you're asking your personality to do that too, because your personality is set up to do the you're already trained to do. And that is survival. And every technique you and every clever little trick you can pull is noticed by the energy itself coming in. A very difficult concept to let yourself be okay with. No matter how many times you try to figure it out, no matter how many times anybody tries to make some sense of it, you're going to run into roadblocks. Those roadblocks are very much important to you. Don't just kick them away. Say, okay, what is this going on? What is this about? Am I okay? Or, my goodness, do I do this more often than I think? Oh, maybe I do. Okay, let me see if I can see it the next time. You're not beating yourself up. You're just trying to see. You get a new pair of glasses. The world is brighter. Yeah, provided you needed glasses. If you didn't need glasses, the world is blurrier, depending on whether it has the right prescription for you, which would be a pane of glass. Metaphors are terrible. I agree. They're awful. Ugh. I'm just trying to see if I've missed something here. I think I've covered somewhat, at least. You guys let me know if I didn't, but covered something, except now Deborah asks, there was a question, there was a little crescent in Deborah's chest where the energy was coming in from through the solar plexus up to the small little center between the solar plexus and the heart, which holds energy so that the heart will not be hurt. And it was opening, and a small little crescent was coming up in the chest like this towards the neck to open the neck in a deeper place than what she was open before. And this has been going on for quite some time. Also, in related to the neck, she would be able to be aware of that. She's somewhat conscious for sure, and a little bit in the back and the back of the head. So this is opening more, so more inner perception will be available as she is able to handle more introspection in a positive way, not a negative way. It is not always a crescent. It can be a thin line. It can be a circular kind of thing, like a woof, or a zone that opens and floods through, because perhaps other lives where people have been opened in different places before. And as soon as you start opening again in that particular place, it's a line that goes back into a life, because you're basically still a being of consciousness, goes into that life where you have experienced an engagement with existence in a particular way. And it comes through time in a short period of time, an instant, provided you can handle it in this life. It will come through and link up with that one. And for the first time, you find out you're a multiple being. You're not only the form you see in front of your eyes. If you can notice these kinds of things, then you know your engagement with those lives are for a purpose that relates to having more energy come into you so you can broaden how you perceive things and be able to be helpful to others by energy coming in through you that relates directly to another for the purpose of helping them in their particular version of inner growth. So they might be helpful to others. Now, that line is maybe a little bit more difficult to understand, but you have the understanding in you. You have it there. The only thing that can hold it at bay is how you already make sense of things, and that is perfectly allowed. Don't take on anything unless it begins to make some sense to you and your experience, your conscious awareness is slowly helping you to be more consciously aware. That way you are being honest with yourself and learning through that position and place within you that relates to being honest with yourself, not protective of yourself. This is very easy to talk about, not so simple as the words I'm using, that's for sure. I truly hope this helps somewhat, at least those 3 or 4 or 5 questions, especially with Chris. And I wish you all well, and I hope your journey is wondrous, because it's wonderful. Take care, everybody. Good night.